A mother, her two daughters, and a family friend walked down a quiet canal path in Phoenix. 90 minutes later, all four were dead. I'll show you how one of Arizona's darkest crimes unfolded, and why the killer's identity, hidden for over 3 decades, still refuses to fit any theory investigators built. On the evening of August 6, 1992, the Grand Canal in Phoenix, Arizona, was doing what it had done for over a century. Its slow, brown water moved silently through the northern edge of the city, carrying agricultural runoff and reflecting the last orange bruise of the desert sunset. Along its banks ran a dirt footpath, popular with joggers, dog walkers, and neighbors escaping the heat of concrete backyards. It was ordinary. It was safe. It was the kind of place where nothing was supposed to happen. By 9 o'clock that night, 4 people would be dead on that path, executed one by one in a killing so cold, so methodical, that veteran detectives who had seen everything in the streets of Phoenix would go home and pour themselves a drink and not sleep. Their names were Alice Cameron, 46 years old, a warm and outgoing woman known in her neighborhood as the person who always waved. Her daughters, Robin Cameron, 18, and Stacy Cameron, 17, both bright, both athletic, both on the edge of adult life. And Brian Bernstein, 22, Robin's boyfriend, a young man described by everyone who knew him as gentle, funny, protective. That evening, the 4 of them decided to take a walk together. It was Brian's idea, some sources say. A short loop down to the canal, then home. Alice grabbed a light jacket. The girls put on sneakers. Brian drove over. It was the kind of decision a family makes without thinking, the kind that becomes, in retrospect, unbearable. They parked near 32nd Street and Cactus Road, in a middle-class neighborhood of ranch-style homes and desert landscaping. They walked west along the canal. Witnesses would later place them there, moving in a loose group, laughing, unremarkable. The last confirmed sighting was around 7:45 in the evening. Twilight was fading. The path grew emptier. And then, somewhere between the streetlights of one crossing and the next, someone stepped out of the darkness and stopped them. When the bodies were discovered by a passing jogger later that night, the scene told a story that made no immediate sense. All 4 victims lay along the path, close together but not piled. They had been forced to lie face down. Each of them had been shot in the head, execution style, with a small caliber weapon. There was no sign of a prolonged struggle, no defensive wounds that suggested a fight. Alice still had her purse. Brian still had his wallet. The girl's modest jewelry was undisturbed. Robbery, the first and easiest theory, collapsed at the crime scene tape. Sexual assault was ruled out. Whatever had happened on that footpath, it was not about money, and it was not about lust. It was about killing. Phoenix Police Department homicide detectives arrived to find a crime scene that violated everything they knew about violent crime in the American Southwest. Gang shootings were chaotic, loud, sprayed with brass. Domestic murders were personal, messy, emotional. Drug hits had signatures. This had none of that. 4 bodies, 4 bullets, no witnesses, no physical evidence beyond the shell casings, no motive that anyone could see. It looked, one investigator would later say off the record, like an assassination. Except the victims were nobody. A middle-aged mom, 2 teenage girls, a 22-year-old kid who worked in food service. There was nothing to assassinate. The investigation exploded outward in every direction at once. Detectives combed the canal path for footprints, cigarette butts, hair, fiber, anything. They interviewed every neighbor within half a mile. They pulled bank records, phone records, work histories. They looked into Brian Bernstein's life first, because the boyfriend is always the first door you open. He came out clean, no drug ties, no debts, no jealous ex-girlfriends, no dark corners. They looked into Alice Cameron's marriage. Her husband, the girl's father, was ruled out early. The family had no enemies that anyone could name. And then, 4 days later, something happened that transformed the case from a local tragedy into an active hunt for what investigators began quietly to call a serial offender. On August 10th, 96 hours after the Canal murders, another body was found in a different Phoenix canal. Her name was Angela Brasso. She was 22 years old, a young woman who had gone out for a bicycle ride on the evening of her birthday and never come home. Her body was mutilated. Her head was missing. It would be recovered 11 days later in the same canal system, miles downstream. Angela had been killed in a way so brutal it made the Cameron scene look almost restrained. She had not been shot, she had been stabbed. And yet the geography, the timing, the use of the canal, all of it whispered a question detectives could not shake. Was it the same man? The answer, in the years that followed, would prove both yes and no, in ways that took decades to untangle. But in August of 1992, in the humid, ferocious heat of a Phoenix summer, all the police knew was that a family had been executed and a young woman had been dismembered within days of each other along the same water. The city was afraid. Canal paths emptied, joggers moved to gyms, parents forbade their teenagers from walking at night, and the tips began to pour in, thousands of them, each one demanding hours of investigative work, each one, in the end, leading nowhere. Let me take you back to what forensic science could tell investigators in 1992, because context matters here. DNA testing existed, but was primitive by today's standards. The FBI's national database was in its infancy. Ballistics matching relied on comparison microscopes and the patience of individual technicians. There were no ubiquitous surveillance cameras. Cell phones were rare. There was no way to ping a suspect's location, no social media to trawl for confessions or brags, no genealogical databases to identify a killer from a distant cousin's saliva. The Phoenix Canal murder detectives had shell casings, autopsy reports, witness statements, and shoe leather. That was it. The shell casings became the case's obsession. Small caliber. The specific make and model of ammunition was kept confidential by the department for years, a holdback detail meant to weed out false confessions. What the department did release eventually was that ballistics comparisons had connected the Cameron family murders to no other known crime in the city, the state, or when queried the nation. The weapon had been used apparently for this killing, and this killing only. It had then vanished. This is unusual. Guns used in crimes tend to resurface. They get sold, they get used again, they get recovered from arrests. This one did not. Someone had disposed of it deliberately, or it was still sitting in a drawer, in a lockbox, in an attic somewhere, waiting. As the weeks turned into months, the theories multiplied. The first and most enduring was that the killings were the work of a stranger, a lone predator who selected the family opportunistically and killed them for the sheer act of killing. This theory had the advantage of matching the physical evidence and the disadvantage of being almost impossible to solve without a confession or a lucky break. The second theory was that the killings were connected to someone in the victims' lives, that the appearance of randomness was itself a disguise. This theory was pursued exhaustively, and every candidate crumbled under scrutiny. The third theory, whispered but rarely spoken aloud in press conferences, was that this had been a hit, that someone in that group of four had seen something, known something, been mistaken for someone. This theory too was investigated. It also went nowhere. Meanwhile, the Angela Brasso investigation moved on a parallel track. Then in November of 1993, a woman named Melanie Bernass, 17 years old, disappeared on her bicycle along another Phoenix canal. Her body was found in the water 3 days later. She had been killed in a way that echoed Angela Brasso's murder. Now the city had a pattern, and it had a name for the man responsible, in the media at least, the Canal Killer. But the Cameron family murders did not fit the pattern. The signatures did not match. The Brasso and Bernass killings were sexual, brutal, up close with a blade. The Cameron killings were clinical, distant, 4 shots to 4 heads. Investigators found themselves entertaining an even darker possibility. What if Phoenix had 2 active killers using its canals at the same time, and one of them was so quiet that the noise of the other drowned him out entirely? In 2015, 23 years after Angela Brasso and Melanie Bernass were killed, Phoenix police announced an arrest in those 2 cases. A man named Brian Patrick Miller was identified through DNA evidence. He was later convicted. The Canal Killer, in the specific sense the media had used the term, was solved. But when the reporters at the press conference asked the question everyone in the city was thinking, the answer was firm. Brian Patrick Miller was not, as far as investigators could determine, connected to the Cameron family murders. The evidence did not support it. The methodology did not fit. The Cameron case remained, and remains, open. And this is where the story becomes strange, in a way that has haunted Phoenix homicide detectives for over 3 decades. Because if the Canal killer did not murder the Cameron family, then who did? Who walked up to a mother, 2 teenage girls, and a young man on a public footpath in early August of 1992, forced them to lie down without a struggle, and shot each of them once in the head with a small caliber weapon that then disappeared from the face of the earth? The absence of a struggle is one of the most disturbing details in the entire file. 4 healthy people, one of them a young man in good physical condition, did not fight back. This suggests, investigators have said, that the killer was armed with visible authority, a weapon pointed at them, a calm voice. Perhaps some have speculated the appearance of legitimacy, a uniform, a badge, real or fake, the lie that if they cooperated, they would be safe. The families of the victims have lived with this for over 30 years. Alice's husband, the girl's father, spent the rest of his life waiting for a phone call that never came. Brian Bernstein's parents launched public appeals, offered rewards, kept the case in the newspapers when it would have otherwise faded. In interviews across the decades, they described the specific cruelty of not knowing. Grief with a name attached is a wound. Grief without one is a room with no walls. You cannot furnish it, you cannot leave it, you cannot understand where you are. The Phoenix Police Department has periodically returned to the case, testing evidence with new technology as it becomes available. In the past 10 years, forensic genetic genealogy has solved cases that had been considered permanently cold, including the Golden State Killer, the Bear Brook murders, and dozens of others. The Cameron family case has been submitted for similar analysis, but the specific challenges are significant. Ballistic evidence without a matched weapon or matched crime cannot generate a genealogical lead. The scene, exposed to open air on a canal path, offered limited biological material to begin with, and what was collected in 1992 was preserved by the standards of that era, not today's. Still, cold case detectives working the file have never stopped believing that an answer is possible. Someone, they have said in interviews over the years, knows something. Someone drove home that night with the images of what they had done still fresh. Someone cleaned a weapon, someone changed their clothes. Someone maintained a life afterward, a job, a family, a house, all of it built over the memory of 4 bodies lying face down on a footpath. That person is out there, or was out there, walking through the ordinary world for decades while the Cameron family's absence radiated outward through the lives of everyone who loved them. There are theories that circulate in true crime communities that deserve to be mentioned, though none has ever been substantiated. Some point to the possibility that Brian Bernstein had encountered someone earlier that day, perhaps at work, perhaps in traffic, some small conflict that a disturbed mind magnified into rage. Others suggest that the killer had targeted Alice Cameron specifically, and the others were witnesses who had to be eliminated. Still others argue for the opposite, that the girls were the target, that a stalker had watched them and waited for the right night. And there is a persistent, quiet theory that the killer was not a stranger at all but a professional, that someone in the group had seen something they should not have seen, and that the entire family was killed to bury a single moment of accidental knowledge. Investigators have publicly dismissed the professional hit theory more than once, citing the absence of any organized crime footprint in the victims' lives. What makes the Cameron case so uniquely disturbing in the landscape of American unsolved murders is not just its brutality, it is the ordinariness of the victims and the extraordinariness of the killer's discipline. Serial killers make mistakes. Impulsive killers leave trails. Killers with motives leave motives. The person who walked away from that canal on August 6, 1992, left almost nothing. No confession has ever surfaced, no deathbed statement, no boasting acquaintance, no pattern of similar killings before or since that ballistics or method could firmly link. It is as though the murderer stepped out of the desert for one evening, performed an act of unimaginable violence, and stepped back into it, absorbed by the same anonymous landscape that had produced them. The canal is still there. If you walk it today, near 32nd Street and Cactus, you will see joggers and dog walkers and children on scooters. You will see the same slow brown water, the same low banks, the same open sky. There is no marker. There is no plaque. The city moved on, as cities do. But somewhere in a Phoenix Police Department evidence locker, there are 4 bullets, and there is a case file that has not closed, and there is at least one detective, and probably more, who has read every page of it, and still, after all these years, cannot answer the simplest question anyone could ask about it. Who did this? Why? And where are they now? What we are left with, then, is a story with no ending, only an interruption. Alice Cameron was 46, Robin was 18, Stacy was 17, Brian was 22. They took a walk on a summer evening in a city they loved, and they did not come home. Everything else, every theory, every arrest that was not an arrest, every lead that dissolved into nothing, is just noise around that central, unbearable fact. 4 lives, 4 shots, 1 killer, and 30-plus years of silence. If this case stayed with you the way it stays with the detectives who worked it, do one thing before you close this video. Subscribe to Dark Cases and turn on the bell. Every case we cover because someone deserves not to be forgotten. And if you know anything, if you lived in Phoenix in 1992, if a story someone once told you now sounds different, contact Silent Witness in Phoenix. A tip that feels small to you could be the piece that finally closes this file.